Hello and welcome to game 139 from CCC 10's qualification event. This time Leela plays versus Rubi and we have a Trompowsky attack on the board with bishop g5. This is actually the third most popular move in the position after c4 and knight f3. Much more popular than bishop f4, for example, or g3. And with bishop g5, white expresses his interest in the h7 pawn. After black castles kingside, white would love to take out this knight at some point, the best defender of h7, and then play bishop d3 at some point and try to mate the black king with moves like queen h5, queen h7, or queen f3, queen h3, and mate on h7. But in this position, the main move of the opening is knight e4, centralizing the knight with an attack on that bishop. The bishop has to come back, and now black attacks the center with c5, and he intends to check with queen a5. This is actually the end of the book now, and here Leela played f3, not minding this check, because here white can just simply block the check with c3, and now this knight has to go back. But black gained something. Now the knight on b1 can go to c3, and arguably the king side, the white's king side, is now weakened by playing f3. In this position now Leela played d5, which is a very good move. It not only takes away c6 from that knight, but also takes away the d5 square. Black maybe wants to play d5 at some point, or even knight d5 to attack this bishop. But with d5 now, both c6 and d5 are taken away from black. Very good move. Rubi now played queen b6, another logical move, attacking on b2. Every time this bishop leaves home, a plan with queen b6, putting pressure on b2, is usually a good idea. And similarly for white, if this bishop comes out, in many openings, many lines, the queen comes out to b3 to put pressure on b7, and sometimes even on a black pawn on d5. And believe it or not, in this position, white's best move is bishop back to c1 to defend b2. Why not b3 instead, you might ask? Well, the thing is that with e4 and g4 and even d5 taking away from the knight on f6, this knight would love to come to h5 and exchange itself for this very powerful bishop on f4. And then the bishop would have to come back anyway, because after bishop g5, h6 could come. On bishop g3, this knight could take it out. So the bishop would have to retreat, and he doesn't want to go to e3 because then it blocks the e-pawn, and on d2 it blocks the queen. So the bishop has to go back actually to c1. This is the best move for the bishop after knight h5. So why not come back now then, in view of knight h5? It's much better to come back here than to lose a tempo with b3, which would even weaken the dark squares here on the queen side. So Leela played here bishop c1, and now we have d6, another logical move. Black needs to develop the queen side somehow, and this bishop has to come out somehow. So d7 is a square where these pieces could go to. Also f5, this bishop maybe wants to go to f5, but now Leela played e4, taking that option away. And now we have g6. With pawns being on e7 and d6, it's very difficult to develop this bishop this way, so it goes to g7. And now we have a4. And initially I thought that the point of this move is to get in bishop b5 check and try to exchange this bishop for one of these, depending which one blocks on d7. Because this bishop is white's bad bishop currently, and maybe you want to exchange it. But actually that would not be a very good idea, because it's true that white has now this wedge on the light squares, but these pawns have potential to move up the board, and then this bishop could become again very, very strong on one of these diagonals. So it doesn't make sense to exchange it, especially that black's light square bishop also struggles with development. It doesn't have squares to go to, and it has to compete for d7 with this knight. So actually bishop b5 is not a good idea. The point of the move a4 is actually something else, and it has to do with this knight. Where would you like to drop this knight if you could? Which square would be a very good square for this knight? b5? No, it's not b5. On b5, this knight can be driven away with a6, and on b5, this knight is not doing so much anyway. This knight would like to land on c4, where it could come to with tempo by attacking the queen. And on c4, this knight would put pressure on d6, and not only that, but it would help later with an e5 break. So knight on c4 would be a very, very good piece. White's best piece, actually. So this is Leela's intention, to play knight a3 and knight c4. And now this pawn on a4 prevents any kind of b5 from black. And also, if this queen moves away and the knight goes to d7, with a move like a5, this knight could be prevented from coming to b6 and challenge this very strong knight on c4. So a4 is a generally very useful move in this position. We now have bishop g7 and now knight a3. Knight goes to c4 soon. And after castles, we now have knight e2. Knight c4 at any point, of course, is a very good move, but Leela prefers here to play knight e2. And after knight d7, she now played g4, going for the attack. In this position, some GMs played knight g3. But here, Leela went for the attack immediately with g4, intending to play g5. Here now, Rubi reacted naturally with h5. This is the best way to treat this g4, g5 idea, because now black puts pressure on this g4 pawn and kind of forces white to make a decision, push forward and kind of close the king side or take on h5 and allow this knight to h5 and slow down white's attack, because now the h pawn is blocked. And in this position, a standard way of continuing the attack on the king side for white is usually to play knight g3 or knight f4. Knight g3 in this case is the better choice, and try to challenge this knight on h5. And the idea is that if this knight takes here, then the h file opens up for an attack. So, and if the knight leaves, then h4, h5 is supported by this knight on h3. So this is a good idea. But here black has knight f6, just keeping the knight on h5, and black is fine. So taking on h5 is not so great. Much better is to play g5 and push this knight back. And after knight a7, Leela played f4, another very good move. It takes away the e5 square from this knight, making the queenside development for black a bit more difficult, because now this knight doesn't have squares. And she would like to also play h4 and solidify these pawns. That would make f5 or e5 later easier to get in if g5 is defended. But here now Rubi played h4 to stop that idea. Leela now finally played knight c4. The queen had to go back. And now bishop g2. Initially I thought that this bishop wants to go to d3 and attack on this diagonal, but the bishop on g2 is definitely in a good position because it defends these central pawns. If at some point e5 comes from Leela, then d5 is defended. And also these pawns are a bit extended. I wouldn't say overextended at this point, but they are extended, and this king is a bit naked here, and after a short castle this king would definitely be very happy with this bishop defending it. So the bishop on g2 stays well. But now came knight b6. A very good move here by Rubi, a natural move, since this knight doesn't have squares anyway, and this knight would love to exchange white's best piece, this knight on c4. But Leela avoided the exchange, of course. When you have space advantage, and Leela has space advantage on every section of the board, you should try to avoid exchanges, because then you leave black cramped. He doesn't have enough squares for all of its pieces. And now with knight e3, Leela is planning to drive this knight back with a5 and then return with the knight to c4. and knight on e3 is also eyeing g4, not allowing this bishop to get there. Rubi now played h3, attacking this bishop, and now bishop f3 is definitely a good move for white, but Leela now preferred to go back to the plan with bishop d3, especially that she's anticipating an attack on this a4 pawn, and then bishop c2 would be a convenient defender of that pawn, allowing the queen to do some other stuff. Rubi now played a5, preventing a5 from Leela, but this now leaves the b5 square forever weak. Can Leela take advantage of it? Well, we'll have to see. The game now continued with knight g3, and now after bishop d7, Leela is kind of happy with her position. She evaluates this at +2, while Rubi says is just +0.6. Leela now continued with bishop d3, planning to drop it back to c2, and now we have queen c8. Rubi is trying to get more space on the queen side. If we check the squares here on the queen side, we can see that b5 is unavailable for black, so is c6, and c4 is also controlled by white at this point, and these squares are all occupied by pawns. a6 is also controlled by the bishop. b4 and d4 are unavailable because the c3 pawn is attacking it or defending it. d5 is occupied by a white pawn. So basically the only square for black on the queen side is actually b6, but it's either the knight or the queen there, and a single piece can't really do much damage here on the queen side. So with queen c8, Rubi is trying to push c4 and gain the c5 square. We now have bishop c2 defending the pawn and c4, and now we can see that black has both b6 and c5 available. The queen on c5 maybe could do some threats on this diagonal. Leela now continued with castles, and short castling at this point, it looks safe for white, but Leela has to be careful not to allow this queen to land on g2. Maybe when this knight is not here, that would be bad. So Leela has to be careful. Rubi continued with rook b8, and now we have king h1 getting out of this possible pin. Queen d8. At this point, Leela is already threatening f5, and a knight could land on f5. If the bishop takes it out, the other knight lands on f5 with an attack on e7, forking queen and the king. So queen d8 defending e7 makes sense. The queen is also defending the knight. In some cases, this bishop coming to e3 with tempo could be important. We now have knight g4. Now that the queen left this diagonal, the knight could go to g4, and f5 is still a threat, but Leela prefers to prepare it a bit with moves like knight g4 and then to double on the f file. Bishop e8, rook f2, knight d7, and now queen f1. And the queen is not only gearing up for f5, it's also attacking h3, which is a free pawn. And if Rubi now just waits to see how Leela develops her attack, then this will end badly. She needs to somehow get some counter chances, and one idea is to open up the position when the white king could be in trouble. So he played here f6, and after g takes and knight takes, we have queen takes on h3, defending the knight, knight takes, queen takes, and now queen c8. Here Leela dropped back the queen, and now we have b5, trying to open up the b file on the queen side. Leela, of course, takes on b5. This separates these pawns, making both of them isolated. And here Rubi now continued with knight c5. Knight is probably heading to one of these squares. And now finally Leela got in f5, opening up this bishop and trying to continue her attack. Rook takes on b5, and now rook g2. Another very logical move. The rook moves to the money file, as Grandmaster Maurice Ashley would say. This is where white has a lot of targets, so rook g2 is a good place for the rook. We now have knight d3, but white just quite simply takes it out and wins the pawn. And after a4, we have rook takes on a4, winning another pawn. Leela is 3 pawns up, at this point, and she evaluates this as completely winning position, plus 5.5. Rubi agrees, plus 4.3, but what can he do? He now dropped back the rook to b8, and now Leela continued with rook a7. Leela doesn't have targets on the queen side, so the rook moves now to the 7th to attack something there. Rubi, of course, doesn't like their rook there, so is trying to exchange it. And here Leela could win this pawn on e7, but that would allow some counter chances here after rook takes, queen attacks, bishop g5, rook a1. Here, Rubi could exchange this rook, and Leela doesn't want to exchange that rook. That rook is very, very nice on the g file, and she hates counterplay. So instead of taking on e7, she just preferred to take the rook. And now she still attacked this pawn on e7, and now Rubi played queen a1. But Leela just simply played queen f1 here, threatening a queen exchange. A queen exchange is not good for Rubi because she's down 3 pawns. But not having many options, Rubi took the queen, and now after the queen exchange she took on f5, but now came bishop h6, attacking this bishop twice. Rook f7 is forced, and now after the bishop exchange, Leela took back the pawn on f5, and she has a completely winning position. She's also guaranteed the rook exchange, which is better for her. And then these two pawns will march up the board, and white will win. Rubi tried here king f8, but now Leela takes the rook and plays king g2, and after king f6, knight e3, and the knight is conveniently defending these two pawns. The knight is on a dark square, so the bishop can't really attack it. We now have king e5, king f3, and now after this bishop checks, Leela drops back to f2. And here black has to be careful because these pawns are really starting to roll. If the king goes to f4 trying to win some more squares, then b4 is already very, very dangerous. The bishop would have to go back to stop the pawn getting to b5, but now h4 could come, and after a waiting move with bishop d7, c4 is very, very strong here. And after something like bishop e8, b5 is now completely winning. After bishop d7, b6, the bishop now has to stop the pawn on b7, but here comes the blow, c5, and these pawns are winning for white by themselves. They don't even need the help of the knight or the king. And white threatens now here c6 and then b7, and the bishop will have to sacrifice himself, and then b8 queens for white and wins. So black has to take. But now comes d6, trying to lure the bishop to d7, and then b7 again, queens. So black has to take again, but now comes f6, and good luck stopping that pawn. White wins. So king f4 would be too ambitious, and that's why Rubi played here king f6, realizing the danger. And now the game continued with b4, and now king f7, and Rubi tries to stop this pawn now with the king. We have king g3, king e8, knight g2 is not necessary, but it's not bad. There were better moves though. King f8, king f2 to confuse Rubi a bit, king g7, knight f4, bishop g4, and now this pawn drops, but it doesn't really matter. White has enough material to win this. These two outside passed pawns are the critical material advantage here for white. King g3, bishop takes, king back to f2, king f7, king e3, king e8, and now c4, bishop c2, h4, king d7, king d2, bishop h7, king c3, king d2, some puzzling moves here from Leela, bishop e4, king c3, king d7, and finally progress with b5. And slowly the pawns will advance, and then this knight will make the difference. We now have bishop h7, h5, bishop b1, king d2, bishop f5, h6, king c7, and now knight e2. The knight is threatening now to go to e4 and attack this bishop. The bishop will have to stay on this diagonal. Then the knight has e6 with check, and then from there the knight can go to g5 and help push this pawn forward and promote it. The bishop will have to sacrifice himself, and then white wins. And here, not knowing what else to do, Rubi decided to sacrifice a pawn with e5. Leela, of course, took en passant, and the bishop can't take because then this pawn goes in. We have now king d8. Rubi is trying to win this pawn now with the king. King c3, king e7, and now b6. And there's no time to take this pawn because then the b pawn queens. At this point, Rubi either has to go back with the king or play bishop e4 to stop the pawn, but Rubi played here d5, giving up another pawn. But Leela went for knight g3, harassing this bishop, and after bishop h7, she played this mind-blowing knight sack with knight f5 check, which completely confused Rubi because he didn't take the knight. He played king f6. And now, of course, b7 again wins, but Leela played king b4. And now after d4, the fight is going on. But suddenly, Leela played e7. And now this e-pawn is threatening to become a queen. But at this point, Rubi is not trying to stop any kind of queening by Leela. And he's trying to get his own queen with d3. But now the e-pawn promotes. And after d2, Leela played now queen d8 check, stopping also this pawn from queening. And after finally the king takes the knight, Leela played queen d7 check, which attacks every black piece. And after king g6 defending the bishop, Leela played this very subtle queen d8 move, which keeps an eye on the d-pawn, and it's also allowing Bernie here to become a queen and reach his potential. Rubi continued with bishop g8, and now the queen takes with check. And after king f5, we have queen f7 check, king e4, queen g6 check, king e3, queen g1 check, and now after king e2, surprise, now Harry goes up the board and threatens to become a queen. Rubi now promotes his pawn to a queen, but the queen gets exchanged, and now Harry becomes the new queen. King e2, b7, will Bernie score today? King d1, and now we have a new knight on the board. Poor Bernie. He wanted queen, he became a horse. King e2, c5, this is still not over. King d1, c6. When Leela plays, all pawns are happy. They have big chances of becoming someone stronger, someone better. King e1, c7, king d1, and finally we have a new queen on the board. King e1, queen c2, and after king f1, finally Leela mates with queen h1 check. What an amazing fight. What a nice kingside attack here, again by Leela. Please subscribe, like and share, and if you would like to support my channel financially, then please consider donating. There is a link in the description of the video. I want to thank you, and also check out some of the other videos. Thanks for watching, and see you soon. Bye bye.